Let's look at some specific examples for these categories. Take the first category we talked about, where both are above the hurdle rate. Telecom is a good example where whether it's financial or economic rate of return, it's been viewed as something that we should get into. A port also, though there are issues of environmental aspects, but still both FRR and ERR of a port are typically viewed as being above the hurdle rate. Well, examples of projects that where both are below the hurdle rate would be, well, in any domain, but where the demand has not yet matured, maybe where the technology also has not yet matured. We could look at the example of Hyperloop today, maybe as a form of transport infrastructure, or even space-based movement on the earth, both of which are being talked about as possibly future forms of transportation. Let's take the example where the economic rate of return is above the hurdle rate while the financial rate of return is below. Urban transport is a classic example of this. Say a metro. Many cities in India are now trying to develop metros. In a metro, if we look at the willingness to pay of the user, so which is in a sense the direct revenues that we can expect, the visible cash flows, generally what we can charge and get a rider to use the metro would bring in a financial rate of return that would be below the hurdle rate. And that is why typically metros often need, if at all we are going in for a metro, they need other forms of income so that they can go above the hurdle rate. But the larger and more interesting question is whether the metro has an economic rate of return which is above the hurdle rate. So, because we have a metro-like urban transport, let us see what are the positive externalities. Well, there is supposed to be a modal shift from people who use road infrastructure, road which often is more polluting because it uses petrol and diesel, causing pollution. Unsafe incidents are more on a road. That's another form of externality, which if the traffic moves to the metro becomes a positive externality. The fact that a metro reaches the suburbs, the property values tend to go up because there is better connectivity. That is another positive externality. Further, connectivity can be offered to various commercial establishments like a mall, where the footfalls would increase, because of which the revenues and maybe consequent tax collections for the government would go up. So, these are examples of positive externalities which, if recognized, would make the economic rate of return above the hurdle rate. Let's take the example of where the financial rate of return is above the hurdle rate while the economic rate of return is below the hurdle rate. A nuclear power plant could be one such infrastructure project. In this case, given the costs of generating power using nuclear technology and the returns we would get by using that power, could lend itself to a situation where the financial rate of return is above the hurdle rate, and therefore it would appear that we should do that project. However, the economic rate of return could be lower than the hurdle rate, because whether as a reality or as a matter of perception consequences of an unsafe incident could be very, very significant. And therefore, the economic rate of return comes below the hurdle rate. Thus, when any society wishes to have a nuclear power plant, very often there is opposition, and unless we deal with that opposition, we actually may not be in a position to go ahead with that project. So, very often we have to consider mechanisms to mitigate the negative externalities of such a project. We have to create buffer zones, and because we have buffer zones, we have to resettle and rehabilitate a lot more part of the population. All of this increases the costs, though the economic rate of return to that extent can be increased by mitigating the negative externalities. If we can do it in a manner that is sufficient for the economic rate of return to go above the hurdle rate, then we can go ahead with the project. So, this basic form of categorizing infrastructure projects into these four categories in a way lays the framework for us to see how different types of infrastructure projects can actually be managed.